You've been taught to see symbols as nothing more than decoration, harmless shapes, cultural ornaments, visual habits humanity invented and repeated until they felt familiar. But what if that was never the truth? What if the symbols woven through your life were never random? The ones that return in dreams, the numbers you keep noticing, the shapes that seem to follow you, the patterns that stir something inside you for no clear reason. What if none of them were random at all? What if they were messages? Not messages written in ordinary language, but signs, codes, and whispers from a forgotten tongue. A hidden language meant to awaken ancient memory and remind you of who you really are beneath the noise of the world. What if these symbols are older than scripture, older than empires, older even than written words, and were created to reach past logic, past explanation, and straight into the deepest part of your subconscious? Because that is where symbols do their real work. They do not simply inform you, they move you, they stir something buried, they call something back to the surface. And here is the truth the mystics warned about, the truth most people are trained never to question. If symbols have the power to awaken the inner light, then there must also be forces devoted to distorting them, emptying them, and burying their meaning beneath distraction, illusion, and endless noise. In other words, if these patterns can guide you back to your true self, then something has always benefited from keeping you blind to their message. So before you dismiss the signs around you as coincidence, ask yourself one question. What if the world has been speaking to you your entire life, and the real danger was never the symbol itself, but the fact that you were never meant to learn how to read it? What if the deepest things guiding your life have never spoken in words at all? What if the signs you have brushed aside as coincidence, the patterns you noticed and forgot, the shapes that appeared in dreams, in memories, in strange moments of silence, were never empty details, but fragments of a language older than anything history can name? For thousands of years, Gnostic voices spoke of subtle forces they called Archons, not always as monsters in a literal sense, but as powers of distortion, currents of confusion that turn living symbols into lifeless objects, that bury what is sacred beneath distraction until the profound looks trivial and the map home looks like meaningless noise. In that vision, the danger was never that truth vanished completely. The danger was that it remained in plain sight while its meaning was slowly inverted. And perhaps that is why so many people move through life haunted by a feeling they cannot explain, a sense that something essential has been hidden not from the eyes, but from recognition itself. Long before alphabets, before kingdoms carved laws into stone, before rulers pressed their faces onto coins to declare power over the visible world, human beings were already speaking through symbols. Across the ancient world, the same images appear again and again: spirals, hands, eyes, serpents, stars, circles, radiant centers, forms repeated by cultures separated by oceans, deserts, and centuries. It becomes difficult not to sense that something deeper moved through them all, not because one civilization copied another, but because the human soul kept recognizing the same invisible grammar. To the ancient mind, a symbol was not decoration. It was a threshold. It was a meeting point between what could be touched and what could only be sensed. A drawing, yes, but also a doorway, a visible mark carrying an invisible charge. This is close to what the Gnostics hinted at in one of their most misunderstood insights, that reality is not merely made of objects, but of signs, not merely built from matter, but shaped by living archetypes that point beyond themselves. The Gospel of Philip says that truth did not enter the world naked, but came in types and images, and whether one reads that literally or symbolically, the suggestion is powerful. It implies that what is most real may not arrive in direct statements at all. It arrives veiled, patterned, encoded in forms that bypass argument and move straight into recognition. In that sense, the world itself begins to look less like a machine and more like a text written in symbols, a field of images quietly echoing something higher than the surface of events. Shapes, numbers, rhythms, cycles, even the geometry of the body, all begin to feel like reminders rather than accidents, as if matter were never the final truth, only the outer skin of something more luminous behind it. In Gnostic language, that deeper origin was the pleroma, the realm of fullness, and symbols were not simply cultural artifacts, but coded traces of that forgotten home. Yet something changed as civilizations hardened. As authority became organized, symbols that may once have functioned as sacred reminders were taken into systems of control. Priests guarded them. Rulers adopted them. Institutions reinterpreted them. Meanings were narrowed, managed, redirected. Then came a more subtle shift, one that may still shape the modern mind, the age of literalism, when metaphor began to be treated as error, when inner language was reduced to superstition, and when symbols were tolerated only as art, ornament, or folklore, no longer as living instruments of remembrance. In that silence, new definitions settled over old forms. What once guided the soul inward was recast as primitive, decorative, irrational, or suspicious. And in the Gnostic imagination, this is exactly how archonic influence works. It does not always destroy. It confuses, it disconnects, it leaves the symbol intact while severing the memory attached to it. The map remains, but no one knows how to read it. The sign survives, but its current is drained. And still, something survives beneath the forgetting. Even now, people are pulled toward certain symbols without knowing why. They dream of certain shapes. They notice them repeating in unexpected places. They wear them on their bodies. They feel drawn to forms they were never taught to trust, as if something deeper recognizes them before the mind can explain why. That pull is difficult to explain if symbols are only random designs, but it makes a different kind of sense if the soul responds to images before the mind can name what is happening. Perhaps this is why some shapes feel familiar the moment you see them, as if they are not introducing themselves, but returning. Perhaps you do not learn the deepest symbols at all. Perhaps you remember them. And if that is true, then the world begins to change in a quiet but irreversible way. It stops feeling random. It starts to feel arranged, layered, charged with correspondence. Confusion gives way to pattern. Coincidence begins to shimmer with intention. What looked like outer noise starts to reveal an inner structure. This is not about being told what to believe. It is about sensing that your life may be threaded with messages you were trained not to notice. And that possibility is unsettling, because it suggests that forgetting was never natural. It was cultivated. If symbols can awaken memory, then anything invested in spiritual sleep would have reason to empty them of power, to make the ancient appear childish, the sacred appear decorative, and the inward path appear foolish. But the strange thing is this: even after centuries of distortion, the symbols remain, and so does your response to them. Which means whatever was hidden was not fully lost. It was only pushed beneath the level of ordinary attention. And the moment you begin to suspect that, the old world starts to loosen. Because once you consider that symbols are not passive images but living signals, you are no longer just looking at reality. You are standing at the edge of reading it, and that is where the deeper recognition begins. And once you begin to suspect that reality may be speaking through symbols, another unsettling possibility slowly emerges. What if the meanings you inherited are not the original ones at all? In many Gnostic writings, the Archons are described not as destroyers of knowledge, but as masters of inversion. They do not erase the symbols that guide the soul. Instead, they twist them, they hollow them out, they leave the outer shape untouched, while quietly reversing the meaning inside. Imagine receiving a map that could lead you home, but every direction has been subtly altered. The mountains remain, the rivers remain, the landmarks remain, but the instructions no longer guide you where they once did. This is how the Gnostics described the distortion of sacred symbols. The form remains, but its direction is forgotten, and over generations, people forget that the symbol ever meant anything else. Consider the serpent. In many ancient traditions, long before later religious reinterpretations, the serpent represented wisdom, renewal, and the mysterious cycle of transformation. A creature that sheds its skin was not a symbol of evil, but a reminder that consciousness itself could renew and expand. It appeared in temples, myths, and sacred art as a guardian of hidden knowledge, a force connected to healing and awakening. Yet over time, the serpent was recast as something sinister, a deceiver, an enemy of divine truth rather than its messenger. Or think of the eye, an image found in cultures across the ancient world. The eye once symbolized inner vision, the awakening of perception that allows the soul to see beyond appearances. It pointed inward, toward awareness itself. But in the modern imagination, it often carries a darker tone, associated with surveillance, control, or fear. The outer shape stayed the same, the inner meaning shifted. The same pattern repeats with other symbols. The flame once represented the indestructible spark within consciousness, the light that cannot be extinguished even when buried beneath layers of confusion. The dove once symbolized the descent of subtle awareness into the human heart. The tree represented the living connection between heaven, earth, and the inner world of the soul. The star pointed to origins beyond the visible heavens. Yet as interpretations hardened and institutions grew more powerful, these symbols were gradually redirected outward, stripped of their inward significance and recast as external objects of belief rather than mirrors of inner awakening. In the Gnostic imagination, this was not accidental. Symbols were dangerous precisely because they bypass the analytical mind. A symbol does not argue with you, it resonates with you. It slips past the defenses of logic and touches something older inside awareness itself. When a human being recognizes themselves in a symbol, something subtle changes. The story of who they are begins to shift. And the moment identity shifts, control weakens. A person who remembers their origin cannot be governed by the same illusions that once defined them. This is why the ancient teachers rarely taught through abstract philosophy alone. They used stories, parables, images, and diagrams. They embedded insight into forms that the mind could contemplate but never fully exhaust. Because the real power of a symbol does not lie in what it explains, it lies in what it awakens. The Archons, according to Gnostic myth, understood this as well, and that is why their strategy was so subtle. They did not remove symbols from the world. They disconnected people from the feeling that once allowed those symbols to speak. The map remained, the language remained, but the living relationship between the symbol and the soul was gradually severed. Imagine being handed a key without ever being told what door it opens. You might carry it your entire life, without realizing it was meant to unlock something within you. This is the quiet tragedy described in many Gnostic texts. Humanity did not lose its sacred language entirely. It simply forgot how to hear it. Yet traces of the old meaning still survive, and sometimes they surface in the most ordinary moments. Think of the spiral, one of the oldest symbols carved into stone across continents. To ancient cultures, the spiral was not a decorative flourish. It represented the journey inward, the unfolding movement of consciousness returning toward its source. It appeared in sacred architecture, ritual objects, and art long before civilizations could have exchanged ideas. The spiral appeared everywhere, as if it reflected a pattern the human mind recognized instinctively. Today, it survives mostly as a design motif, a faint echo of something that once pointed inward. Yet when you look at it carefully, there is something strangely alive about it. Your attention follows the curve inward, almost automatically, as if the shape itself is inviting awareness to turn back toward its center. The same is true of the circle with a single dot in its center, a symbol once used in ancient cosmologies to represent the moment when divine consciousness enters the material world. In many modern contexts, it appears as nothing more than a graphic mark, stripped of its deeper significance. The eye, the spiral, the star, the radiant circle, each survives as an echo of meanings that once guided entire cultures. And perhaps that is why some of the most powerful symbols no longer feel sacred when you first meet them. Not because they lost their power, but because you were taught to look at them without feeling what they were trying to awaken. According to Gnostic thought, the Archons did not need to destroy these symbols because the human mind could be trained to overlook them. If a sacred symbol can be reduced to decoration, its power appears to vanish even while the form remains everywhere. But something else also remains, the response within you when you encounter these shapes. Sometimes it arrives as curiosity, sometimes as a quiet recognition you cannot explain, sometimes as the strange sense that a symbol is somehow looking back at you rather than simply being observed. This reaction hints at something the Gnostics believed deeply. Symbols operate on more than one level at once. The outer level is the visible form, the pattern your eyes perceive. But beneath that lies another layer, an inner stirring that arises in consciousness itself. That stirring is difficult to define. It is not a thought exactly, and not purely an emotion either. It feels more like the memory of something you have never consciously learned, and in the mythology of the Archons, this is the one thing they cannot fully control. They can distort meanings in culture. They can reshape institutions. They can reinterpret ancient stories. But they cannot extinguish the subtle resonance that occurs when a symbol touches the deeper layers of awareness. That resonance is older than language itself. It is older than belief. It belongs to the soul, which means that even in a world where symbols have been emptied, inverted, or dismissed, their original purpose can still reactivate within a single moment of recognition. And that possibility leads directly to the next question the ancient teachers quietly asked. If symbols are not just images but keys, what exactly were they meant to unlock within you? If symbols are not simply images but keys, then the deeper question slowly reveals itself. What doors were they meant to open within you? The Gnostic teachers believed there were certain symbols so powerful, so revealing, that the forces of distortion worked tirelessly to weaken them. Not because these symbols were rare or secret, but because they pointed directly to the truth of what a human being actually is beneath the surface of ordinary identity. In their writings, these symbols fall into three quiet categories, each one touching a different layer of remembrance within the soul. The first are the symbols of origin, the images that whisper about where consciousness comes from before it enters the dense theater of the material world. Across ancient cultures, the same forms appear again and again. The circle, the radiant halo, the lotus opening in still water, the womb of darkness holding a spark of light. At first glance, they may seem like simple artistic choices, but to the ancient mystics they carried a deeper resonance. They were not describing physical birth. They were pointing toward the moment when the divine spark, the luminous core of awareness itself, entered the realm of form and forgot its origin. In the language of the Gnostics, that origin was the pleroma, the realm of fullness, a state of wholeness where consciousness knew itself completely. The symbols of origin were never meant to be analyzed like academic diagrams. They were meant to stir recognition. They quietly remind the soul of something it once knew. You did not begin here. You entered here. And the strange thing is that these images can still move people who have never studied mysticism at all. A mandala in ancient art, the golden halo behind the head of a saint, the glowing circle painted at the heart of a sacred figure. These images speak before belief has time to intervene. They speak directly to a layer of awareness that responds before the mind has time to question it. It is as if something inside you already understands what they are pointing toward. According to Gnostic thought, a person who remembers their origin cannot be held in the same illusions that once confined them. And so the meanings of these symbols were gradually softened, trivialized, or dismissed. They remained visible, but their original purpose faded from memory. The second group are the symbols of ascent, the quiet maps describing the movement of consciousness as it awakens and begins to return toward its deeper nature. Once you start noticing them, they appear everywhere. The ladder rising toward the sky, the mountain that must be climbed, the upward-pointing triangle, the tree whose branches stretch toward the heavens, the rising sun that appears each morning out of darkness. Even the serpent appears again here, not crawling along the ground but rising along the spine, symbolizing the awakening of inner energy. These images repeat across cultures because they describe a universal intuition. That awareness is not fixed where it currently stands. It can rise, it can expand, it can remember. But as these symbols spread through religious and cultural systems, something curious happened. The serpent of transformation became the serpent of deception. The tree of knowledge became something forbidden. The mountain of revelation became reserved for prophets rather than ordinary people. The rising sun was absorbed into institutional symbolism and ritual language. The pattern was the same each time. The path upward was preserved as an image, but slowly removed from the experience of the individual soul. Because the moment someone realizes that the journey home is inward, the need for external authority begins to loosen. The Archons, in Gnostic imagination, understood this very well. Once you stop searching outside for permission, their influence begins to dissolve, and yet the symbols of ascent never vanished. They are still carved into temples, woven into myths, embedded in sacred geometry, hidden in the rhythms of nature itself. Each sunrise, each spiral shell, each branching tree repeats the same quiet message. Consciousness can move beyond the state of forgetting. But perhaps the most powerful symbols of all are the symbols of identity. These are the images the Gnostics considered the most dangerous to systems of illusion, because they do not merely describe the journey of the soul, they reveal what the soul actually is. The eye, the flame, the star, the radiant human figure surrounded by light. To the ancient mystics, these were never decorative emblems. They represented the indestructible center of awareness itself, what the Gnostics called the divine spark. The eye does not symbolize control or surveillance in its original meaning. It symbolizes sight in its deepest sense, the capacity to perceive truth directly without mediation. The flame does not warn of destruction. It represents the light within consciousness that cannot be extinguished, even when buried beneath layers of confusion. The star does not merely point to distant heavens. It hints at an origin beyond the visible cosmos, suggesting that the essence of awareness itself carries a celestial quality. When these symbols are seen clearly, a subtle shift begins to occur inside the person observing them. The identity built around limitation, around the idea of being small, separate, and powerless, starts to loosen. Something quieter, but far more enduring, begins to surface. Not the personality, not the story you tell about your life, something deeper. The recognition that the light you seek may be the same light that is already looking through your eyes. This is why some Gnostic texts describe the Archons as fearing these symbols, not because of the shapes themselves, but because of what happens when someone recognizes themselves within them. The moment identity shifts from, "I am only this body and story," to, "There is something luminous within me that cannot be erased," the entire architecture of illusion begins to crack. Symbols were designed to awaken this recognition. They were meant to stir a knowing that cannot be taught through argument or doctrine, and that is precisely why their meanings were inverted over time. If the symbols that point to your origin, your path, and your identity can be reduced to decoration, superstition, or empty design, their power appears to disappear even while they remain everywhere. Yet the deeper current never vanished completely. The human mind may forget, but the soul continues to respond. That is why certain symbols hold your attention longer than others. Why sacred geometry feels strangely familiar even if you have never studied it. Why shapes like triangles, spirals, hexagons, and mandalas seem to carry a quiet energy that draws the eye again and again. Every symbol works on two levels: the outer pattern that your eyes see, and the inner stirring that begins to move inside awareness itself. The outer meaning can be changed, distorted, or dismissed by culture, but the inner activation remains beyond reach. This is why symbols have survived every empire, every ideology, every attempt to rewrite the story of human consciousness. They continue to wait quietly in plain sight, embedded in art, nature, dreams, architecture, and even the geometry of your own body. And perhaps this is where the deeper revelation begins. You were never meant to analyze symbols endlessly, dissecting them until they become abstract ideas. You were meant to feel them, to let them resonate inside you, to notice the moment when a shape, a pattern, or an image triggers something that logic cannot explain, because the real power of a symbol does not lie in what it tells you, it lies in what it awakens. And once that awakening begins, the world starts to look different. What once appeared random begins to reveal subtle structure. What once felt chaotic begins to show quiet order. The ordinary surface of life becomes something else entirely, a living field of signs reflecting an inner process unfolding within you. In that moment, you are no longer simply moving through the world. You are reading it. And what you begin to read is not a message from somewhere outside yourself, but the echo of a truth your own consciousness has been carrying all along. The ancient teachers called this recognition gnosis, not the accumulation of information, but the sudden remembering of something timeless. And when that remembering starts, the illusion that once surrounded you does not collapse through force. It dissolves quietly, like mist disappearing in the light of morning. Perhaps the most important thing now is simply this: symbols were always meant to remind, not to exclude. Quiet reminders of where consciousness began, of the path it quietly walks through the world, of the deeper identity that lives beneath the roles and stories we carry each day. Over time, those meanings became softened, diluted, or simply lost within a world that teaches the eyes to look outward more than inward. Yet the symbols themselves were never truly removed. They remained scattered across dreams, art, numbers, architecture, nature, and the small, unnoticed moments of daily life. The Gnostic view suggests something gentle but profound here. The obstacle was never the absence of symbols, but the forgetfulness that keeps us from recognizing ourselves within them. And perhaps you may have sensed something shifting while listening to this exploration, something subtle, almost like a quiet alignment taking place beneath the surface of ordinary thought. When symbols are no longer dismissed as decoration, but felt as reflections, the world begins to soften in a different way. Patterns that once seemed random begin to feel meaningful. Moments that once passed unnoticed begin to carry a quiet depth. And the self that once appeared small begins to feel connected to something wider, something patient, something that has been waiting for recognition rather than demanding belief. The Gnostic teachers did not insist that people adopt new doctrines. Instead, they pointed toward perception itself, toward the idea that the divine spark already present within awareness understands the language of symbols without needing to be taught. It only waits to be remembered. In that sense, nothing you may have felt during this journey is accidental. The curiosity, the quiet familiarity, even the moments of uncertainty, all belong to the same unfolding process. You are not late to it, and you are not separate from it. Each person encounters these ideas in the season that belongs to them, and perhaps that is why the symbols you notice next may feel slightly different than the ones you noticed before. As if something within you has begun to recognize a conversation that has always been quietly taking place between the world and your own inner awareness. And somewhere within the next reflections we explore, that quiet conversation continues. As I reflect on everything we've explored together, one thought continues to echo quietly beneath the surface. Perhaps the most intriguing part of these ancient teachings is not whether every symbol carries a hidden meaning, but the way certain ideas seem to awaken a strange sense of familiarity inside us. It is almost as if something in the human heart responds to these images long before the mind tries to explain them. When we hear about spirals, eyes, stars, or circles representing something deeper than decoration, many people feel a subtle recognition, a feeling that these symbols have always been speaking in a language we somehow understand without ever learning it. And that raises a gentle but powerful question. What did you feel while listening to this journey? Did any symbol we discussed remind you of something from your own life? A dream you once had, a pattern you noticed repeatedly, or a moment when a simple image seemed to carry more meaning than you could explain? I would truly love to hear your thoughts and personal experiences. Sometimes the most fascinating part of these explorations is not the theory itself, but the stories that emerge from people who begin noticing the symbols that have quietly followed them through life. If any part of this video resonated with you, feel free to share it in the comments below. You could simply write something like, "I'm starting to notice the signs," or describe a symbol that has appeared in your dreams, your memories, or even your everyday surroundings. Your perspective might open a new doorway for someone else watching. And if this exploration sparked something in you, you can support the channel by leaving a like and subscribing, so we can keep exploring these deeper layers of symbolism, consciousness, and hidden wisdom together. Every interaction helps these conversations reach others who may be searching for the same quiet answers. Thank you for spending this time here, for listening with an open mind, and for being part of a community willing to explore the mysteries that often hide in plain sight.